Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the QSP Knives Titanium Penguin. First off though, in the name of full disclosure, this guy was sent to me directly from QSP. They had sent me a Penguin way back in the day, which I found to be a pretty good knife. It's absolutely solid. Maybe not my absolute favorite thing ever, but it was pretty solid. But then they reached out to me, said, "Hey Nick, we're doing a new version of it in titanium scales. Is that something you'd be interested in looking at?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." But as always, I told them I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. They still did send it along. Nonetheless, we have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. What we see here is that it's actually the handle on it is not that large, but the sharpened blade length is relatively long. We're not that far off the PM2 in that way. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica. And so again, we're seeing, handle's not that small, but the blade, absolutely, you get some fair amount of sharpened edge out of this guy. Sharpened edge, wow, it's going to be a whole... Listen to me attempt to talk today on YouTube. And in terms of blade length, this guy is just over 3 inches. There is really no way, unless the cop really likes you when measuring the process, this is coming in over 3 inches. So you're going to want to keep that in mind, or grind a little bit off the front of it. That's a legal concern for you. Next thing, what's a QSP? Well, QSP is, QSP. I don't know exactly what it stands for, but it is a company. They are based out of China, but they've got some U.S. representation and pretty good distributorship here in the U.S. And they're a company that really seems to specialize in doing some of the more budgety stuff, although they've definitely done some, higher-end sorts of titanium stuff in the past. So there's that. And then finally, like I said, this is a new version of the knife, but I am going to go on ahead and I'm going to review it fresh. I'm going to give you the full good, great, bad, and the ugly, just because it is fundamentally a very different beast as a result. So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly, as I just telegraphed now. So on the good side, to start with, one of the things they did really well here is lock bar access. We see here that there is the lock bar down here, which you need to, get at to press open, and that works great because there's plenty of room for it. It's very easy to get my finger in there, close this guy up. Yet at the same time, it's not, in any way prohibitive. It doesn't cause ergonomic issues. It's pretty solid. So that's great. I appreciate that. Next thing, this guy has ambidextrous thumb studs on there. We'll talk about these thumb studs more later. Rest yourself assured. But at the same time, it is nice that you've got the thumb studs on both sides, making this a little bit more lefty friendly, although it's worth noting that the clip is not reversible. So there is that. Next thing, I gotta say, this has some nice features to it. What I mean by that is that this is actually doing, for $100, spoiler alert, that's your price, things that really weren't all that common in titanium frame locks up until very, very recently, and still in many cases is skipped. So this has a lock bar insert. It has an over-travel stop, which prevents this bar here from going too far out in that direction, getting bent. It has a fixed pivot. This is not free spinning. As you saw in the disassembly, it has some nice roundovers at the edges of the scale, lanyard hole, as well as, and this is a little detail, but it's an important one, right at the very top here, I'll zoom in and show you this, right at the very top of the lock bar here, they have chamfered this edge, which is something that is so often missed and is such a pain in the neck when they do. This is great. Seeing them going in and chamfering all of the little surfaces, that's really, really nice. You can tell that they spent a fair amount of time and effort really getting this guy right, and I appreciate that. And then finally, the clip on this guy is actually a sculpted titanium clip, rather than just being a sort of a bent spoon clip sort of thing like we're seeing here on this particular, this is the Ontario Rat 2, but they've gone all the way with the clip too. So they've really put in a bunch of details there that in a lot of ways they didn't have to, but in a lot of ways were a really good idea to. So that's great. Next thing, this has a really nice action, especially after disassembly. This closes beautifully. It's running on bearings, which is nice, but it has a very, very nice smooth action, a very, very nice detent, meaning it opens just deliciously. This is a very good action. This is shockingly good for the price. The action on this knife is much better than it has any right to be, and is a nice reminder that thumb studs are a really good way to go on ahead and work with bearings, because you end up with something that's pretty excellent. Then finally, on the good side, the blade of this guy is pretty good, right? It's got so the steel on it is 154 cm, which is, by the way, different, mind you, from CPM 154. This is the non-powder metallurgy version, but it is an absolutely good-to-go sort of budget steel. It's a solid thing, and it is a Warncliffe-style blade with a nice straight line on the bottom here. It's worth noting it is not exactly straight, but it is still a very nice thing, because Warncliffe blades are great. If you need to, like, cut into something, you can kind of dip the tip down in there and then just, that kind of thing. It's really nice, says the person who opens a lot of packages, usually containing knives. Anyways, but it's a Wharncliffe is a very good utilitarian blade shape, right? And then, finally, I gotta say, the edge on this guy is actually quite thin. We come to a nice thin edge, both out here at the tip and then down there at the base. This is a very nice slicing blade. Just from a utility standpoint, the blade on this is quite nice. And 154 cm is one of those steels that also just strops up beautifully. You can run this guy across a strop, and you get something absolutely spectacular. There are a lot of reasons to love 154 cm, and that's kind of among them, right? So this is just a really, really nice blade, and to me, all that is the good. It's got a nice blade, a great action, a lot of nice little details and features that show me that they were really thinking as they designed this. Ambidextrous thumb studs, great lock bar access, and I don't know, there's nothing else on the list, but my intonation would probably indicate otherwise. So, it's named after a Batman villain. There you go. That's the final good thing I had to do to end the list, right? On the great side, probably overthought that last bit. On the great side, the price on this is actually quite good for what you're getting here. We are looking at $96 for a titanium frame lock that is honestly pretty well done. There have been a lot of budget titanium frame locks out there in the world, even from companies with relatively good distributorship. I'm not talking like your AliExpress dropship, dice roll style brands. I'm talking other people have tried to do this, but this is the first time it's really been done well. This is the first very, very inexpensive titanium frame lock I'm now aware of that does not have major compromises. That does not have something where it's like, oh, that's a shame. Right, this was really well done, just roundly, and I really do appreciate the knife. And so for me, the price on this guy, $96 for a titanium frame lock that's worth a damn? Okay, I am 100% down for that. So to me, that's what's great. On the bad side, 154 cm at $100 really wouldn't be super impressive in pretty much any other situation. But here they're trying to do something a little bit more expensive with the handles. They're putting in the effort, so I'm not going to drag them too much for it. It's a fine steel. I got no particular beef with 154 cm. I think it's one of the better budget steels out there. But at the same time, like I said, it's one of those things that on the balance is absolutely fine. Next thing, this one does bug me, but it probably won't be relevant for a lot of people, and that is it is just over that 3-inch line. And considering that this little tiny extra bit of tip can be the difference between, having a knife for utility and being a dangerous felon in some areas, that's not a line you want to, cross casually, so to speak. So I really wish they'd just knock that back a little tiny bit. But like I said, that's close enough that you could do that at home with a freaking angle grinder, right? Don't do that. It's probably dangerous. Anyways, I digress. Next thing, the sharpening choil on this guy is off the slightest amount. They just need to make this a little tiny bit wider, because right now there's a little tiny smile down at the bottom here with this blade. I'm nitpicking here, but you know what? That's something they could improve very quickly. Just another millimeter or two, and this would be absolutely good to go, and it would be completely catching the grind here. There's that. Next thing, lanyard hole on this guy remains a little lazy feeling, right? The lanyard mafia got to him. It's not the end of any worlds particularly, but honestly, there's enough room around this back standoff here. You probably could have just put a lanyard on there. I don't know. Whatever, not the end of the world, but to me, that's kind of like, why'd you just through there? No, absolutely not. Next thing, one of the big advantages to a titanium frame lock is that they tend to feel relatively light, right? They tend to feel very low density. And that's a great thing. This isn't that. Now, here's the problem, though. Here's why I'm a jackass. Well, okay, there are many reasons. This guy comes in at 3.43 ounces. That makes this almost an ounce an inch, right? This is not far off from being lightweight, but it doesn't have that same lightweight feeling as a heavily pocketed. By pocketed, I mean they've done a lot of milling on the inside of the titanium to reduce weight. It doesn't have that same feeling of like feather light that some of the titanium frame locks have. This is $100. I'm being unrealistic here, but that is one of the main differences between a titanium frame lock on the low end and a titanium frame lock on the higher end, where they go through, they do the internal pocketing, etc., where those can feel really ridiculously lightweight while being solid. This doesn't quite do that, right? I'm not really judging them for it. I don't think they could have done better for $100, absolutely, but at the same time, that is one of the main differences you want to consider if you're thinking about like, oh, well, it's a titanium frame lock, but it doesn't feel like some of the other ones. So that's probably why. Then finally on the bad side, this actually comes over from the original review of the Penguin. I don't care for the grip on this guy. The ergos are okay. The reason I don't care for them is because there's actually a fair amount of gap here, right? It feels like my fingers are very far away from the blade. I can kind of choke up and put my finger up on this area, but that's not super comfortable either. I just don't feel like there's a super great way to hold this particular knife. This little region is pretty wide. And unfortunately, it is also relatively short in that even with my relatively small hands, there's just not that much grip area here. It's just, to me at least, ergonomically, the QSP Penguin original version never really worked super well. It's not bad, but it's a little weird. And this, unfortunately, has the same issues. So, ergonomically speaking, it's not a knife that I particularly enjoy. There are other budget knives I feel like are a little bit nicer in that way. Not the end of any world, certainly, but it is certainly a thing. So, to me, that's what's bad, is I don't care for the ergos so much. It doesn't feel lightweight. The lanyard hole remains pretty lazy and huge. The sharpening choil is off a little bit. It's just over a line. And like I said, 154 cm at this price is fine, but it's not going to be the top performance steels out there in the world. But again, price. On the ugly front, the big ugly issue with this guy, and the most annoying thing about carrying this, is these thumb studs. These thumb studs are very, very long. They stick way the heck out. They are sticking out way past the scale of the knife, to the extent where if you set the knife down on the table, the thumb stud is the thing that hits before anything else, right? And you feel the thumb studs in your pocket. You're feeling this thumb stud pressing into you. And when you open it, unfortunately, they have done this kind of a thing, where they've put like a pyramid ziggurat sort of thing on the top of this. That is not a good idea, right? That is the very worst part of the Chris Reeve Shabazz. That is not the thing you want to imitate, right? And so as a result, you have these thumb studs that are both too long as well as badly shaped, such that they don't feel comfortable in use, they don't feel comfortable in carry, and they're even a little bit weird when you set the knife down. And so I really dislike these thumb studs. It just feels like an extra 1.5 millimeters snuck in there someplace, and that they just didn't get the shape right on them. There are lots of good thumb studs in the world, like, here, I'll show you the Rat 2 here. These have a much kind of, they're not that much shorter, but at the same time, the prominence relative to the knife is a little bit different, and they're also just wider. Every part of this is wider, and so it just feels better on the hand. So these thumb studs are unfortunately just not great, and that's definitely something that should be replaced in a future run of these guys. That, to me, is very ugly. Final conclusion front, I think this is a really interesting version of an existing knife, right? The Penguin has been a favorite for a lot of people, and it's a design that in a lot of ways, and maybe this is my own Batman bias coming in, that I just don't like the Penguin, right? But at the same time, it's one that a lot of folks love. A bunch of people, Nick, why don't you recommend the QSP Penguin more? Like, it just never really clicked for me. But the thing is, I can also acknowledge the original version is a very, very good budget choice, and I think this is an interesting version of it too, right? Because it's got a lot of good stuff going for it. It's got nice lock bar access, ambi opening, an array of desirable elements for a frame lock that really... We're very lucky. If this is what $100 knives are looking like these days, we're living in a great era, so to speak. That's the only damn way, but you know what? Hey, nonetheless, it's got a very nice action as well, a very nice blade, and a price that makes a very good entry point into titanium frame lock. That I got to admit, that's great. The steel is pretty budgety, but whatever, not a big deal. It is just over a legal line in terms of blade length. It has a lazy lanyard hole, a little more weight than you're used to in the higher end for frame locks. The ergos aren't that great. The thumb studs are just kind of a mess. But honestly, my biggest feeling is this is surprisingly nice for the price, right? With a couple of little tweaks in terms of the sharpening and in terms of the thumb studs, I feel like this could be a hit out of the park. This could very easily be a gem. And honestly, as it stands, this is the cheapest titanium frame lock that I can actually recommend. And it's a knife that also happens to be pretty damn functional alongside being a cheap titanium frame lock. I mean, and yes, again, I know that there are options from dice roll brands where you go on some dropship website and you can get things that are, saying they're titanium and saying they're 154 cm, but they don't have any support. They don't have distributorship, etc. They can be great if you get lucky, but this is a piece that's pretty readily available from the folks you probably already shop with, and from a company that's got some reputation and some actual support. There is a question, of course, that you should ask of, like, is titanium frame lock something worth aspiring to? And look, at some level, yeah, I love titanium frame locks. They're great. I got a bunch of them. Right? And it is a definite win over a steel frame locks. This is the CRKT Razorcliff, which is a great knife, but unfortunately, when you make a frame lock out of steel, it becomes super duper heavy. The characteristics just aren't the same. There is a reason that tie frame lock is a thing on the higher end, and steel frame lock, well, ain't. But at the same time, it's not world-changing relative to a liner lock. If you don't like the QSP Penguin regular version, probably not going to care for this that much either. And there are lots of frame locks that are available for, 20, well, okay, maybe 50 to $100 more. You can very easily get into some relatively nice titanium frame locks out there in the world, and oftentimes with a little bit more steel. So I don't feel like you should look at this as like, oh, I need a titanium frame lock. I mean, they're cool. They're great. And this is a pretty decent budget-focused one to try out. And if you like the Penguin, then by God, do it. You're going to like this knife too. But at the same time, it's kind of worth remembering that, yeah, that's a higher-end feature, but it's not necessarily so much better in the rest of the world. But that said, I still really think that this is kind of a cool piece, right? If somebody says, Nick, I want the cheapest decent titanium frame lock, then this is probably where I'm going to send them for a little while. This is a pretty solid little piece. It's a good utilitarian cutting tool, and especially if they address some of those little issues, I can definitely see this being a hit out of the park down the road. So anyways, that's my general feeling here, is that it's quite good for the price. You're getting a very nice budgety sort of $100 isn't really budgety at this point, but beats the heck out of some of the other stuff. But you're getting a relatively inexpensive titanium frame lock, which is great. And you know what? If you like the Penguin, then by God, it's going to be real hard to say no to this one. So anyways, I hope this has been interesting to you, that my Batman bias has not gotten me too deep into that. And if the QSP comes out with the Riddler, we're going to have a hard time there too. Hope this has been interesting. Have a good one. Bye now.